My name is Pedro Reynolds Cuellar. I used to work at D-Lab. Now I'm a grad student at the Media Lab working with the Personal Robots Group. And I'm also the co-founder of Zainova, one of the innovation centers that is associated with IDEN and D-Lab. As I said, today we're going to discuss the topic of idea generation, which is basically a survey of some of the techniques that you can use to foster creativity when engaging in design, and also an understanding of when to use such techniques. So I hope that by the end of the session, you would understand some of the core concepts around idea generation, and that you have become familiar with some of the techniques that you can use to engage in creativity and engage in generating ideas, and also when to use each of these techniques. So before we start, I wanted us to take a look at where in the design process are we right now. So you surely have seen this graph, which represents the design process. And it represents it not only as one iteration, but it shows it as a number of loops and micro iterations as you go through the design process. So you just came out of the frame the problem stage, where you hopefully came out with good, narrow, very concrete problem framing, and now you're going to start creating a solution. So if we look closer, what we'll see is that in this stage, we will use some of that information, or all that information that we've gathered and all that insight that we generated, and we're going to start coming up with several ideas and approaches on how to solve that problem. And then later on a further session, we will check how can we validate and select some of those ideas. Now, why do we need a framework to generate ideas? Well, there are several reasons for it. One, it has to do with biology. When we engage in creativity, we are engaging our brain in a lot of different tasks. So not only our brain is taking care of the default actions such as vision, audition, perception, but we're also using a lot of intellectual brain power to come up with all these ideas. And as with many ideas, they come from our experience, and our experience is connected with our emotions. So we are sort of engaging both our cognitive and our emotional brain. So it is a very draining activity, and we don't want to come out of it without having captured as many ideas in as a structured way as possible. The second reason for it is because as we engage in the practice of development, in the practice of design, we'll find out that not all cultures operate the same way. So in some cultures, you will need certain techniques or certain approaches to be able to gain insight, or to be able to hear the ideas of those who you find yourself working with. This has to do with the way that certain societies are structured. It has to do with the personalities, the broad spectrum of personalities across the human scale. So it is very useful to have a myriad of options and techniques that you can use when doing this. And lastly, we sort of can't make ourselves be creative, right? Sometimes we don't have that lightning strike that allows us to come up with all these amazing ideas. So what we do is we start a fire, and a fire can take us very far. We can do a lot of things with a fire. So having a structure is sort of like creating a fire while we wait for this lightning strikes to come. All right, so moving forward, what do we need before we start generating ideas? So I would ask you to start the session or come to the session with three main things. The first one is an open mind. I want you to be ready to think out of the box. I want you to be ready to really stretch your mind in different directions. And I want you to be ready to come up with very pragmatic ideas, but also somewhat crazy ideas, and try to build these ideas not only yourself, but working along with your teammates. The second one, and it's sort of a necessary input for starting this idea generation session, is you need to have a clear problem statement. So as with many stages of design, you'll see there's this divergence and convergence points. So you just came out of framing the problem session, which is a stage of design that is mostly focused on converging, of taking all the information that you gather and try to narrow it down into a very concrete problem that you're going to approach. Now, as we enter the idea generation stage, you're going to be diverging and generating as many ideas as you can. Now, if you don't have a very concrete problem statement, then you will be generating ideas into many different directions. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later on. Then the last thing is I'll ask you to not review very extensively what's out there to solve the problem that you're approaching. It is good to get some inspiration, but I would say do not get that many inspiration, because I feel that sometimes when you survey extensively, you come to this process with some sort of bias. You've seen many solutions and you've seen some that you like, some that you don't like, and probably your ideas will try to follow that pattern. So what will you need for this session? Because there's many ways in which people are good at expressing their ideas, you may want to have a notebook and a pen or colors, or if you like sketching materials, whichever media you feel comfortable with. But we are going to be generating ideas, and you need a way to document them. And this is a very good practice when you're engaging in this type of activity.